everybody, I'm InTheLittleWood, also known as Martin. Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be taking a look at the remainder of the user interface blog post that we started out in the character creation video. So, here it is. Moving on to the second screenshot from within this blog post, we now get the map for Hytale, which has got so many little nuggets of information. Let's start dissecting them. Let's begin by getting the mechanics out of the way first. Now, this is a small detail, but I absolutely adore it. You have to be very purposeful about placing a marker onto the map, because more often than not, when I'm playing video games and I'm moving around the map and whatnot, I end up accidentally placing a marker, which can then go on to confuse my allies as to where I'm actually talking about. To place down a marker of your own, you have to double click as opposed to singular or right click. Double click is the same method employed if you want to remove a marker, but they make it very specific that you have to hover over said icon, which would lead me to believe that you can place down numerous markers on the map at any given time. But it's the third setting that has me most intrigued. So by right clicking on a marker, it grants you the ability to alter that marker's settings, and this could mean a number of things. Firstly, it could mean that markers have customization options to be able to change things like the emblem, the color, all those sorts of things. So imagine you're in a forest. You might want to shy away from kind of like greens and brown colors on the map because they might get lost in the color scheme, and instead you might opt for some yellows and reds. But of course, in zone 2, which is now a desert, you would probably want to invert that process. Secondly, you may even be able to give a title and maybe even a subtitle to your markers. So you can see in the demo picture right here that this is the case with the quest icon, which of course isn't, I'm assuming, placed by the player. That is part of the adventure mode and the quest log and the story version. I just think that would be really nice for us as players to be able to put down a brief description of what we've seen at that location, even if it's limited to around about 50 characters. The line right here of help Quebex to defeat the corrupted golem comes in at 47 characters, so 50 feels like it would be a nice comfortable spot for us to reside in. So rather than putting a singular word or having to remember a color scheme that you set up for yourself, being able to just put something like good mob farming, cool cave 691, or explore this later with friends would be really beneficial. Lastly, and I know that this is a little bit of a stretch, but where my thinking is with this is that in most mod packs that people download, they all tend to put in some kind of waypoint system, sort of a beacon system, where wherever they place down a marker, it shoots a giant column of light into the sky and is visible from pretty much anywhere inside of the world as long as you're close enough. So maybe that is one thing that Hytale have realized is popular amongst players for Minecraft, and maybe they're going to implement it into the core game. Who knows? The final control is the mouse wheel. You scroll it to zoom in and out, pretty standard, but it does make me hopeful that given the size of the map that's already in this shot, that we're going to be able to zoom out to the full scale of the map rather than it being broken up into segmented areas like other MMOs tend to present. I guess we're just going to have to wait and see on that one. And then also, can I just point out how adorable these weird little turtle clouds are? Pretty safe to assume that this pattern will appear anywhere on the map that you haven't physically explored yourself and seen with your own eyes. Now we move over to the left hand side of the screen to the legend. So basically a legend, for those of you that don't know, is an explanation of what icons on a map represent. So we start off with the story dungeons icon, and I'm actually quite lucky that I'm making this video so late after the UI blog post first dropped, because since then we've been given more information about dungeons which might help us clarify some of these points. So let's actually go ahead and clarify the different types of dungeons that you can find within Hytale. So the first kind is likely going to be the most common, and they are just regular dungeons. So they'll have a structure on the overworld, and within the basement of them it branches out into caverns and caves and jails and all these sort of sprawling corridors that eventually meet in a final room, which will very likely contain either a huge wave of foes, one strong bugger, and there'll be plenty of prizes to be had for plundering into these. So the next type of dungeon we've had clarification on are challenge dungeons. So my guess is that these will appear in fewer numbers throughout the world, but they have been confirmed to be in every single zone inside of Hytale. Now these look a little bit more distinct than your regular kinds of dungeons, so they're going to be a little bit easier to spot and identify. What's interesting though is that where they do appear in all the zones of Hytale, there is this strange runic stone that kind of stays consistent throughout all of them, but it seems as though the extra trimmings around the portal will change dependent on the atmosphere, or I guess the biome that they reside in. So for example, in zone 1 the door will likely be surrounded by dirt and grass and leaves, whereas in zone 2 it's more likely to be kind of sandstone and clay and things like that. And they didn't stop there, they went ahead and gave us some handy little details that we need to know if we can spot a door off in the distance to see whether it's worth our time. And in this case, a closed door is a good thing. So in the concept art it talks about how the door door will be closed until the first player approaches it. From that point onwards, the door will remain open. Now, you might be wondering, like, well, how do you know if it's already been done or whether somebody failed it and is coming back for it later? The very simple answer to that is the torches. So I'm assuming the flame will be extinguished when a challenge is completed and when the reward is collected, but it's also possible that it's simply just going to change colour, because in the concept we can see that we have a red flame, a sort of orangey tone to it, but then there's also another one represented which has a bluey greeny kind of colour. That could well be because of the zone that it resides in, or that could be the indicator that the loot has been had and you shouldn't bother. So the door is opened, you take a few steps down into the earth and you've jumped through the portal. What kind of challenges await you? So the only thing confirmed by Hytale so far is that within these challenge dungeons, there will be occasions where certain block types will actually become invincible. So this could work similarly to Minecraft's adventure mode where literally nothing can be destroyed, or maybe on occasion they'll want certain ores and artifacts to be inside of there, but they don't want you to be able to farm them, they're there just purely for the visual. So this is where we can start just spitballing ideas, and I would love to see yours in the comment section below. So a couple that I came up with was, imagine having to get through a dungeon in a timely manner. Like, imagine it's filled with a poisonous gas which just slowly chips away at your HP, forcing you to like speed run through the whole situation. Another could be focused around parkour, just purely jumping puzzles until you get to the end. Some could contain new variants and quantities of mobs from future zones to kind of like, you know, tease a little bit ahead to what you might be expecting later on in the game. Maybe there'll be a temporary thing where it strips you of all your inventory, forcing you to gather things from within the local area to overcome a challenge. Or they could be really cruel and say, nope, no healing items are going to work in this zone, you have to do it with a singular health pool. They could slow down your movement speed, they could blur your vision, there's so many things they could do. I'm really excited for them. So before we get back to the map, I just have a few more questions for the developers in regards to challenge dungeons. So first and foremost, I want to know, can you enter a challenge dungeon together with your party, or will it always be a case of you're split up into individual instances? Leading on from that, if you enter as a group, how does the loot system work? Will we all get an equivalent amount? Do we have to roll need or greed? Are those going to be mechanics inside of the game? I'd be intrigued to find out their answer to that. And I think maybe the most important one is, if you have a friend who jumps into your world, they wipe a dungeon clean and then they log off, does it reset after a certain amount of time, or is it just that loot is gone forever and you never get to take on that challenge for yourself? The final kind of dungeon we've been made aware of are portal dungeons. So my guess is these will spawn even less frequently than the challenge ones, and from the concept art, it seems as though they've been made more purposely, as in the surrounding area leading up to them is so much more atmospheric, and their unique selling point is that it seems as though some of them will require certain criteria to be met before you can even activate the portal to step into, which is what we can see here with the world dungeon. So to loop ourselves right the way back around to the start of the point, story dungeons are likely going to be portal dungeons that contain very strong narrative threads that continue the story of Hytale moving forwards. One of my biggest hopes for this game as well, by the way, is the fact that we have these really cool cinematic tools that we've been teased in the trailer. I'm really hoping that there are going to be in-game cutscenes for certain story dungeons. I just think that would be sick. If there was voice acting, wow, that would take it to another level. I wouldn't be expecting that. The next legend icon is for the Temple of Gaia, which if you're eagle-eyed, you'll notice isn't visible on the map simply because that is where we are right now. We're currently within a zone of it known as the Garden of Elements. And something tells me the Temple of Gaia is going to be a very frequently visited spot throughout the story of Hytale, and let me give you my reasons why. So if you don't know, Gaia is the goddess of the world of Orbis, so she'll no doubt play a major role in the story of Hytale, and so will this location. So at the moment, we have 3 races that are confirmed to worship Gaia, okay? So we've got the Quebecs, who are the little forest people, and the way that they sort of pay tribute is they carve effigies of her out of pieces of wood procured from ancient trees, which is a little bit messed up, right? Like, if you didn't see my previous video, basically when a Quebec reaches the end of its life, it becomes a tree, so they're just skimming a little bit of wood off of old Grandpa Jim's shin. No problem, right? All good. The next faction to praise Gaia are the Ferens. These are the adorable furry little fellas that live in the Howling Sands within Zone 2. And much like the Quebecs, they go ahead and make tiny little statues as well, and it's also fair to note that in my previous video I mentioned that in their braces that they wear around their wrists and sometimes their ankles, they actually etch one of the 5 elements of Gaia into them, and it's the wind symbol, which for them represents freedom. Now before we move on to the third and final confirmed faction that sort of praises Gaia, I want to quickly discuss these giant statues. So you'll notice that there is a human player stood on top of it, and that thing is humongous. You'll also notice well that these seem to be overgrown and seem quite aged. Could this mean that in the story of Hytale back in the day, maybe even still knocking around now, there are a race of giants that inhabit the world? Hagrid? Anyone? And then of course we move on to us, the humans. Now what's really interesting about each of these statues that have been created is how similar they all are. It does make me wonder if at some point in history, Gaia has actually revealed herself to the inhabitants of Orbis, and that's why they're so confident in worshipping her. And when she did as well, she may have actually styled herself to look more familiar to people like the Ferrins, because if you look at their statue right here, they've gone ahead and added little ears onto it. They've either done that to stroke their own ego, or Gaia wanted to appear more friendly and more approachable by mimicking them. And I'm getting the vibe that this event probably happened a very long time ago. It could be hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, because at the moment I'm under the impression that Gaia is asleep. And this could well be the story of Hytale as we're going to play it. So if you have a little look at this concept art right here, this is the Temple of Gaia dungeon concept art. And in this sketch, you can see that there is a fragmented building floating in space. And you can see it looks kind of like an observatory or a museum. Either way, beneath the surface of this building, in the top left corner, we get a blown up version of its content. And if you can see right there, a very familiar character is stuck inside of ice in what looks like some form of cryostasis. Now going back to each of the towers in this building, we seem to have the colours there to represent each of the 5 elements. So we've got red for fire, green for earth, blue for wind, a darker blue for water, and yellow for lightning. And if we have a little look at our sleeping Gaia right there, she seems to be void of all of these colours, even the whites and the greens, which are also very important to her look. So my guess is that the story of Hytale is going to involve the threat of Varin, who we currently think is the antagonist of the story. His void magic is going to be trying to take over Orbis, and it'll be up to us as the player to retrieve the 5 elemental hair braids from different corners of the world, reunite them together, and awaken Gaia from her slumber. So maybe it'll be a case of at the end of each major zone you defeat a humongous boss and you retrieve a key that opens a door in the Temple of Gaia's Garden of Elements. Because if you notice, back in this screenshot, we have got 5 very significant paths branching off from the center, one for each of the elements. And you'll notice that on one of them we already have a story dungeon located right there. So you open the door, you go on in, and you pass some kind of trial to prove yourself worthy of wielding the elements. You bring all 5 together, you save the day. 10 out of 10 IGN. So, to cut a long story short, that's basically why I think the Temple of Gaia icon will be visible from worldwide across the map. Going back to the legend then, and we move on to the World Gate. So this one's a pretty simple guess, but I'm assuming that these icons will reside where there is a portal to take you to one of the 4 other planets in our solar system. So after my first video, by the way, I did get a message from project leader Noxy clearing up the pronunciation of said planets for me. So I only got 2 wrong. The first one was Torbalin, as opposed to Torbalin, which I said previously. And then the other one, our neighbouring planet, that's not purple and horrible, is Numdrasil, N-U-M-D-R-A-S-I-L, so Numdrasil, which of course then leaves over the other 2 planets with the world gates of Nexus and Karpak. Next on the legend list, we have got the spawn point. So this actually threw me off a little bit, because this whole time, given the sort of the grass and the leaves and everything, I was imagining that the Garden of Elements was actually residing in Zone 1, but I'm now starting to think that maybe this is a separate instanced area and you can actually travel to it from each zone, which would make sense, right? After you beat the big boss, the major town nearby would have a portal that could take you to the Garden of Elements, so you don't have to worry about traipsing through each of the zones just to get back to this one location. Or it could well be that there is simply a respawn item you can use to choose where you respawn at when you die. They've placed it far enough away from the corrupted golem so he doesn't aggro and they get caught in some kind of death loop, you know what I mean? I'm really undecided on this one just because of how purposely placed it is. It's like dead center with the path and right at the bottom of the map. It just seems a little bit too specific. Next up, we have got the point of interest icon. Looks like a little tent. And I really like this. I like the fact that it's going to mark down places of significance as we move around the world of Hytale. What I am hoping though is that we aren't spoiled about points of interest and they only get marked on the map automatically once we've seen them for ourselves. I don't want it to be a case of we have a grayed out map with all those little turtle clouds and then there's just loads of point of interest icons knocking about the place. I think that would ruin that sense of discovery for me personally. So last but certainly not least, we have got the player and friend icons. So first and foremost, the player's icon should be obvious, right? It's real life players who have hopped into your game, and this all but confirms that adventure mode will have multiplayer functionality. And we also have the very recent blog post about servers actually backing that up by confirming that adventure will be a filter within the search functionality. So let's round things out with a couple of final observations. So on the map, we can see 2 chest icons, which aren't actually represented in the legend because either 1, loot is a very very obvious icon to most players, 2, that is loot that has been discovered but not actually collected, or 3, maybe that is an icon placed by a player and they've used the settings functionality to change it to a loot icon so their friends can see where that treasure can be had. Then dead center in the screen, we have got the first glimpse of a boss mob icon, and I'm guessing that these are going to be present in pretty much most story and portal dungeons, as this is going to guide the player through that instance to let them know exactly where it is they're meant to be going. But it's more interesting to read the tooltip. So I already think it's really cool that we have options here to actually share the location of a boss mob with other players, whether that would be server wide or whether it's limited to your party, or you can send it in a whisper to a friend, who knows, but either way, that I think is really special. But what I really want to touch on is actually the green diamond on the right hand side of the tooltip. Now you'll notice that one of them is filled in and one of them is grayed out. It is my guess that once you defeat that golem monster, that basically the second one will fill in, and that is actually paired up with the world dungeon on the right hand side of the Garden of Elements. So here's hoping that every single dungeon that has criteria has its completion somewhere within a sensible radius of it, and it's not going to be in a whole different zone or require a specific item. So there we go, everybody, that is it for today's video. Again, much like the last one, the more I sit down and ponder over these things and the more blog posts we get given, the longer these scripts get, and I've basically made a whole video on a single screenshot, which I'm so sorry about, but I just love gushing and theorizing and everything else like that, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Be sure to do that, leave a like on the video as well, and ring that bell so you get notified of every single Hytale video I put out in the future. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.